been for you to work through this and to be able to now leave us with this sort of genomic skill that we now have when it comes to variants, Shankar?
Well, it's taken quite a long time. The original ideas and early work that we carried out in Cambridge University, this dates back to the mid-1990s. And it led to us actually founding a company called Selexa in 1998. And the team at Selexa turned all this into the first working system. It was quite a complex system in 2006. Then in 2007, that got acquired by a company called Illumina, and Illumina have advanced it even further and made it faster and cheaper than what it is today, which people are using.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, David, it's not that long ago, was it, that it took years and years and years to sequence someone's genome. I mean, it was a huge story when the first one was ever done. I mean, it's such a speeded up process now to see all of this work in action must be quite something.
No, it's very exciting. The original human genome cost $3 billion, so there are 3 billion bases. It's $1 a base. It took a long time. Now technology that we developed through the company has speeded up that process by about a factor of more than 1 million. So this enables us to sequence all of the bases of individuals and understand why that predisposes certain people to get certain diseases. And so that's been quite a revolution in biology and very exciting to be involved in.
So where does this take us moving forward? I mean, obviously there are considerations with what's been going on with the pandemic, but in terms of our future health and how we use this sort of information, Shankar, what possibilities does your work open up?
Well, first, the technology is having quite a major impact in the basic study of biology and living systems in research groups all around the world. But to focus on medicine, genomic medicine, which we sometimes, it's a term we use to describe using genomic information to better understand medicine, provide better treatments for people. And in areas such as, I would name, cancer is one area where a lot of very fine work has taken place. Rare genetic diseases is another. And of course, infectious diseases, which includes the current pandemic we face. And there are already examples of deployment of this type of approach in the clinic. So in the UK, part of the NHS is an organization called Genomics England, which was set up by the government a few years ago. And their patients who have cancer or infectious diseases and also rare diseases are having their genomes sequenced. And what's happening over time is that we're learning more and more about how such information can be used. And even today, in the cancer areas, there are certain cancer subtypes where particular patterns of mutations are guiding clinicians to give a particular therapy that's more effective against that specific type of cancer. So I think over time, we will learn more and more about the possibilities. And also, as the system changes in the way that we use healthcare data and genomic information, it'll hopefully become easier and easier to fulfill this vision of genomic medicine.
I mean,
but we're in the early phases of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But David, I mean, there must be a sense of, I'm sure you're a modest man, but you must be very proud of the fact that you are at the forefront of what could be the key platform for a lot of medicines moving forward.
I'm delighted to be involved in the technology. It's really worth stressing it's not just me and Shankar. It's a large number of talented people in the university, at the company Selexa that we co-founded, and at Illumina, we took on the technology that's really made the technology what it is today. But it's very exciting because we were there right at the start. We literally wrote down the idea on a piece of paper back in 1997, and it's really gratifying to see it being used all over the world. and as Shankar described, starting to actually improve human health and prevent people from losing their lives.
Well, look, it is a real pleasure to talk to you both this morning. Sir David and Sir Shankar, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. So far this May, we've had above average rainfall. The UK as a whole has had 77.7 millimetres, which is 111% of the average May rainfall. And there's yet more wet weather to come. In fact, there's already rain this morning across parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Wales and down towards the southwest, with heavy downpours and strengthening winds that will be steadily moving northeastwards through this afternoon. The heaviest and most persistent downpours across parts of Northern Ireland later, Northern England and Wales. The rain more light and patchy nature elsewhere. It will be quite windy as well through the day, with gales or severe gales likely around southern and western coast, brightening up a bit later on though across central and southern parts of England, and the rain more patchy across parts of the north of Scotland, but elsewhere very wet and windy.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. Now, it's a case of planes, trains, but not necessarily automobiles this morning. It seems thousands are set to defy government advice and jet off to amber-listed destinations for a break. But is it really allowed? The Transport Secretary asked people to exercise common sense, but find out what that actually means in just a moment. Also for you this morning, the recipe for eating well post-lockdown. We'll talk to celebrity chef Raymond Blanc about the reopening of his restaurant and his new book, which pays tribute to his late mum. That's at 9:30. And then, no anarchy in the UK at the moment, just live music. We'll chat to the Sex Pistols' Glenn Matlock, who's part of a Sky Arts campaign to support small music venues. That's at 9:45. It's Thursday, the 20th of May. This is here for years to come. Sky News reports from inside the mental health units dealing with a massive surge in children with acute psychiatric problems.
She doesn't come out of her room, she doesn't eat much. She needs the help. She needs professional help.
Another extension to England's vaccine rollout with more surge testing and surge vaccinations to curb the India variant.
The absolute key is people getting vaccinated. And once they are getting covered against all these variants.
A platform for change. The government unveils a timetable to shake up the UK rail network with a promise of a fairer ticket system. The conflict in the Middle East. Hamas officials tell Sky News ceasefire talks are underway, but Israel's Prime Minister vows to press on with the military offensive.
EasyJet's chief executive has told me there is no reason why Greece, Spain, France and Italy should not be on the green list.
And so far, May has had above average rainfall, and we are expecting yet more wet weather for the rest of this week. I'll have the details for you later.
Very good morning to you. Sky News has been given unique access to a child and adolescent mental health trust, which sees firsthand the mental health crises children are facing because of the pandemic. 100 children a day are now attending A&E departments, many of them suffering injuries as a result of self-harm. Now, those treating them are in no doubt the pandemic is behind the increase. They blame isolation, anxiety and unprecedented levels of distress. It's thought that nearly a quarter of 14-year-olds have self-harmed, but the number could actually be much higher. Even before the pandemic, rates of hospital admissions for self-harm for girls rose by 36%, and that figure doesn't take into account those in A&E. Now, the latest figures show that although the first lockdown depressed numbers coming to A&E with psychiatric conditions, they are now increasing month on month. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has spent the last 3 weeks with the staff and patients of the Pennine Care NHS Trust and Adolescent Mental Health Services. A warning that his report on their work contains references to self-harm, images of self-harm, and some references to suicide.
It's a very long walk up to the children's ward, and you do get time to think of what we're going to see when we get there.
Nicole Renshaw is a mental health nurse, and her patients are children.
Most of the time the children have harmed themselves, and there are children on the ward most days.
While the nation's been fighting a virus that's killed so many, thousands of children have been suffering, and the problem has been slowly and silently building. This is the children's ward of the Royal Oldham Hospital. And this is 14-year-old Laura. She's here because she's deliberately harmed herself.
Often children will self-harm or harm themselves in other ways to deal with stressful situations, and in Laura's case that has definitely been a factor.
Laura's mum says her daughter hasn't been herself for a while now.
She doesn't come out of her room, she doesn't eat much. She needs the help. She needs professional help. Well, I go through depression as well, and it comes and goes whenever it feels like it. So I know what she's going through.
Her pain is so raw, and I can see the fear in her face.
What do you want to happen now?
I just want her back to normal, how she used to be. Smiling, laughing, joking.
I have to understand to make sure that you're safe.
Life at home in lockdown has been tough.
I've not really gone out as much.
So is that normal for you to be sitting in your bedroom all day long?
Not usually. I'm usually outside with people, but then COVID happened and now I'm...
Since COVID, they've all just seemed to reclused into the bedrooms.
Yeah.
And now she's stopped eating.
Like, I'm either too busy to eat or I'm doing something and I'll just forget about it and wait for later. So I just don't bother.
And how long's that been going on for?
Quite a while.
Right, our next bit, Mum, are you listening? We need to get a safe or a lock on a drawer. All medication, sharps, ligatures need to be in that box, okay?
And then Nicole gently tries to give Laura something to live for.
Okay. You want to go to college?
Yeah.
You want to go to uni?
Yeah.
I want you to hold on to that, because it can be done.
Before the pandemic, A&E attendances by children with psychiatric conditions had tripled in the last 10 years. Now, month on month, those numbers are continuing to rise.
She said she was going to kill herself.
Looks like she's assaulting Mum quite frequently.
This is Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, or CAMS for short. A child who's been in A&E for mental health reasons has to be seen here within 7 days. And it's in these rooms that they try to heal the minds of children. We've spent 3 weeks here with unique access to staff and patients to understand the pressure the service is under.
Have you ever done anything like this before?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, it started in year 7.
Ah, right, okay, so it's not only for a few days, it's been since.
Yeah.
So it's been for a couple of years. Yeah.
This is Summer. She was in A&E a week ago after harming herself. Now mental health practitioner Michelle has to figure out what help she needs.
Yesterday in English, I was like happy. And then like as soon as I went in Spanish, I was just crying my eyes out. I literally got sent out.
Summer explains that her mood can swing from high to low.
So the last time Summer self-harmed was that yesterday, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Are they on both your arms, Summer?
Just one.
Just one arm?
Should
Okay.
I show you?
Pardon?
Should I show you?
Yeah, you can do, yeah. Right, okay. So they don't... What's that on your hand?
What, that?
Yeah.
I'm scratching.
I'm scratching.
I have it there as well.
Right, okay. Okay.
I wish I didn't do it. Like, but these are going to be scars now. But I just regret it. That's it.
It's thought around a quarter of all children Summer's age have self-harmed. It could be much more than that. The CAMS team is now dealing with a surge in referrals, self-harm, suicide attempts, anxiety. It is a grim but growing list of troubles. Dr. Chantal Basson is the lead clinical psychologist here, and she's worried about the effect the pandemic has had on some children.
There is going to be a section of people in our society who are kind of surviving through this now and are in total survival mode. And as we come out of the pandemic, that we're more likely to see the mental health impact on those young people and families. I think we might be feeling the tremors, but I think the impact may well yet to be seen.
Summer is now being supported by the CAMS team here at Pennine Care. It could be a long, careful process, but thousands of youngsters are having to wait to get to this stage. And for children in crisis, there is often no time to spare. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Well, if you've been affected by any of the issues in Nick's report, you can contact the Samaritans. Their number is 116123, or you can email them joe@samaritans.org. Now, in the last few minutes, we've heard from the outgoing leader of the Democratic Unionist Party and First Minister, Arlene Foster, during her final visit to Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister. This is what she said.
He needs to deal with the protocol because my fear has always been that the protocol will narrow the common ground in Northern Ireland. And I think we've seen that over the past 6 months. And so we need now to continue the work that we've been doing over this past 6 months. I think both the Prime Minister and Lord Frost have been listening. They have been putting out some very good statements in relation to dealing with the protocol. But now we need to see action, and we need to see action quite soon, because every day the protocol remains the way it is, there's more damage done to Northern Ireland.
And how are the talks going? David Frost said that you might have to invoke Article 16 if discussions with open trade don't get sorted.
Indeed, and that may well be the case. We have said all along when the European Commission tried to invoke Article 16 at the end of January that the Europeans were quite happy to do it in terms of vaccines and making sure that they had enough vaccines. This is doing real damage to Northern Ireland in terms of our trade, but also in terms of the Union, and therefore the Prime Minister needs to act, and I hope that Lord Frost will bring forward proposals very, very soon.
If it is invoked, how damaging will it be for Northern Ireland?
Well, as I've said, every day that the protocol is in place does more damage to Northern Ireland in terms of our trading relationship with our largest partners in Great Britain. And of course, it does damage to the Union as well. And my real concern as I move to leave office is the fact that actually it's narrowing the common ground in Northern Ireland, and that's a real concern.
How damaging has Brexit been for the UK?
Well, I think you have to separate Brexit and the protocol. The protocol is doing the damage to Northern Ireland. Of course, I believed in Brexit because I believed that we needed to leave the European Union and all of the stringent rules that were there to allow us to be more flexible, to allow us to have a place in the world. But if the United Kingdom is to have a new place in the world, Northern Ireland must be part of that. And at present, because of the protocol, we're not.
And as you on your final day, how do you feel with Mr. Boots taking your place?
Well, you know, it's my final day probably coming up into Downing Street as the First Minister and as DUP leader, but I hope it's not my final day in Downing Street at all.
He has said that he'd want you to leave earlier, for a smoother transition. Would you do that?
Well, look, I haven't been speaking to Edwin. I haven't had any contact from him, but I'm sure he will speak to me in due course. Thanks. Well, look, I got into politics to make Northern Ireland a better place, to move Northern Ireland forward. I believe if we are to do that and continue to do that, then I think we need to deal with the protocol in a very proactive way. And I hope that when I speak to the Prime Minister this morning, we'll hear more about that. Thanks very much.
Now, surge testing and vaccinations are being ramped up in 6 locations in England as part of continuing efforts to control the spread of the India variant of COVID-19. Earlier on the programme, the Transport Secretary told us that vaccine take-up was imperative to curb the transmission of new variants.
We are seeing, and this is what the Prime Minister and Health Secretary both said yesterday, that fortunately the vaccines are working. So the absolute key is people getting vaccinated. And once they are getting covered against all these variants, including this Indian. There are 3 different Indian variants, actually. This is B16172 that was causing particular concern. But it does actually, you do actually get protected once you've had that vaccine.
Well, I also spoke to the Transport Secretary about international travel because there's been confusion since that traffic light system was announced about whether people can go to countries on the amber list. So I asked Grant Shapps to try to clear it up for us.
We've moved away from a situation where everything is, it's banned, it's illegal. I know we've got very used to this the last year. Yeah. Everything's banned and illegal, and you know we're moving away from that and asking people to apply a bit of common sense. People asking for guidance. The answer is actually for a red and an amber list. It's not for going on holiday. And you might say, well, why have an amber? I mean, I've heard this several times, and let me just explain that. Every country in the world is put into the amber category, and then when the Joint Biosecurity Centre look at it, they'll either say, actually, this country has a particularly good record, they're doing all the sequencing, they're on top of the problem, they've got high levels of vaccines, it's a green country, or there are real problems here, it's a red country. So the default is amber, but amber is not please go and visit there.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Kate McCann. I mean, in some respects, Grant Shapps sets out a clear message: don't go, really, if you really don't need to. Of course, we want to, and you can easily get a flight now.
Yeah, and that's the problem. This is not government legislation, it's not law, it's guidance. And there are loads of things in general daily life that are guidance that, you know, you're told not to do, but we all do anyway. And I think that's what the government is finding here, that trying to navigate that balance between what Grant Shapps said in the first part of that clip about personal responsibility and personal risk, and then the second part, which is clearly there is still a risk of new variants coming into the country. Trying to balance that going forward, coming out of this pandemic, hopefully, is not an easy task, because you can't stipulate what everybody should and shouldn't do all the time. It's just not possible. And we're going to see more of that in the coming weeks and months when we start talking about, you know, how we should wear masks on public transport and how we should all make decisions about our daily lives. That's going to become a more frequent conversation, I think, and it's what the government has found before on travel. Now, the reason that there's been lots of concern about this has been that new variant, and I think the signs this week are more optimistic than they had been on the vaccine tackling that variant particularly well. We're not seeing huge rises of cases, we're definitely not seeing deaths increase, and the scientists generally seem to think that June the 21st could be, you know, it could reasonably happen. So that makes this question about travel, I think, a little bit less important perhaps than before we had all of that data. Now, important to say, we still need to see what that says in total, but Labour are still saying that the situation with travel is not clear enough and they would do away completely with that amber list. Here's Emily Thornby from just a few moments ago.
You just hear these terrible stories of people coming in through Heathrow and spending 3 or 4 hours queuing with people from green countries, yellow, amber countries, red countries, all mixed up together. And then, the people from the red countries go off and spend time, in hotels, but they've already spent 4 hours cheek by jowl presumably in some great Petri dish, potentially bringing in Lord knows what into our country. I think, and the Labour Party thinks, that we need to pause this. We need to stop it. We certainly need to stop this idea of amber countries, and we need to be much stronger about it. Pause it and have a look again.
I think that would be quite a difficult thing to do, to completely pause that travel system. It would need something else in place. And as Grant Shapps said, the vast majority of countries at the moment are amber because that's the default position until they are allowed to go green. The question is, going forward into the next few months and potentially the next few years, how well the vaccines work, how well boosters work, and of course, if we see any new variants, that could change the picture completely.
Yeah, indeed. OK, Kate, thank you. Now, the government has announced the biggest shake-up to the railways in a generation, with a new body to take over responsibility for track, stations, timetabling and ticketing. Let's talk to our reporter, Milena Veselinovic, who's at King's Cross. It sounds complicated on the surface, Milena. What actually is going to happen in real terms?
Well, it's dismantling one of the main pillars of privatisation, which happened over a quarter of a century ago, which is when the management of the tracks was separated from the management of the actual train service. So Network Rail is in charge of the infrastructure and private companies are in charge of running train services. But with this new reform, it will all come under the responsibility of a single body called the Great British Railways, and they'll be the one-stop shop for all the grievances. It's supposed to end the blame game for when things go wrong, when trains are overcrowded or they're late or they are dirty. Now, this body will not come into effect until 2023, but some of its reforms will roll out sooner. As soon as June, there'll be a flexible season ticket for people who perhaps travel only 2 or 3 times a week. This is in response to, of course, the pandemic, with more people working from home at least a few days a week. This body will also set timetables, it will set fares, and it's supposed to be the kind of overhaul body of the entire rail system. Broadly, people are welcoming it, but the unions say that because the train services will still be run by private companies, it will still leak taxpayers' money into private pockets. They say it's just papering over the cracks. OK, Milena,
thank you. Now, Hamas officials have told Sky News that a ceasefire bringing an end to the 11 days of bombing across the Israel-Gaza border could be reached imminently. Well, since the Israeli-Palestinian conflict began, more than 200 Palestinians and 12 Israelis have been killed, including 66 children, most of those on the Palestinian side. Well, of course, civilians are really facing a lot of difficulties on the ground in Gaza City particularly. Let's talk to Ignacio Caceres, head of the Gaza sub-delegation at the International Committee of the Red Cross. Good to see you this morning. Put it into context for us. What is happening on the ground in the Gaza Strip?
Good morning, Stephen. The Gaza Strip has not seen this level of violence in many years, and I would say ever. The Palestinians, our colleagues, our acquaintances here in Gaza tell us that the level of violence is unprecedented. Let's not forget that Gaza is a densely populated area, and most of the strikes are taking place in the cities. Therefore, the level of destruction, the level of fear for the population, the destruction of basic infrastructure and services is posing a great humanitarian risk to the Gaza population.
Yes, so I mean, in terms of that infrastructure, what, losing power supplies, losing water and sewage supplies, and those issues presumably that are going to take quite a long time to repair, if at all.
Indeed, we are not sure how long it's going to take. Our teams in Gaza, the International Committee of the Red Cross, they are coordinating with the service providers, water and electricity, in order to find and to support them in fixing the problems across the street, across the strip. At the same time, we are in contact with the parties to the conflict in order to facilitate the safe access of the service providers to those places where urgent repairs are needed.
In terms of access, what is happening for organisations like yours in terms of getting humanitarian aid across into Gaza? We know that a vast proportion of the population were reliant on humanitarian aid before all of this. Are you able to get supplies through?
Well, for the moment, both the entry of people and goods is on hold. We are in constant dialogue with the parties of the conflict in order to facilitate a humanitarian pause or a humanitarian truce for us to bring in the much needed support. It is not only humanitarian aid in terms of medicine, drugs, medical devices, etc. It has to do also with fuel for the Gaza power plant. It has to do with expertise. We have a surgical team, a medical surgical team on call, ready to enter in Amman as soon as the entrance into Gaza is feasible at any time.
There's talk, Hamas talking about a ceasefire. The Israeli Prime Minister not at the moment. He says he's determined to carry on for the time being. For those people, for those civilians in Gaza, just how desperate is the situation? How soon do they need your help?
Well, Stephen, if I had to use one word to describe the situation for the civilian population in Gaza, it would be fear. Like I said, they have the memories from the 2014 war that is still fresh. And the level of violence and the level of destruction that we are witnessing these days increases that sensation of fear.
Dogecoin has had an unreal last 12 months. Elon Musk, Mark Cuban, Snoop Dogg. I don't know how to say Shiba Inu, but I do know this crypto is taking the world by storm with its huge social presence, used as a tipping currency, and dare I say, fun factor. Naysayers point to its volatility and the fact that it's just a meme coin. But here's the thing, Dogecoin may be the most inscrutable cryptocurrency, but anyone can understand this. Dogecoin, wow, much coin. How money, so crypto. And now you can buy Dogecoin on eToro.
Brush your teeth in less than 10 seconds with this revolutionary toothbrush?
It was created by a well-known dentist, and it took him over 3 years to develop the innovative expansion radius technology that powers it. He was tired of seeing his patients wasting their time and ruining their teeth with ordinary brushes. So he decided to partner with a product engineer to create a groundbreaking toothbrush.
More than 90% of my patients had dental decay problems. These patients all had one thing in common. They all used ordinary toothbrushes. I never thought that manual and electric toothbrushes could be that bad for your teeth and gums. But after doing research, I discovered a dirty secret that proved shocking. The oral hygiene market has not advanced in the last 100 years. We've been using the same toothbrushes for the past century. And no one ever bothered to investigate whether this was the ideal way. The truth is that these cleaning tools are the real reason why you continue to visit your dentist. Chances are, you're using them totally wrong. Toothbrushes should be held like pencils so that the pressure is light. Instead of brushing, you should only make subtle vibrations. The bristles should be soft so they don't damage gums. But in truth, no one has the time and patience to do it correctly. So, we decided to create something new. Our goal was to create an effective toothbrush that would change the oral hygiene industry. A brush that would be more efficient than all other methods, capable of cleaning every corner of your teeth and preventing dental decay and unneeded expensive dentist bills. We've been able to develop a unique tool that's affordable for everyone.
Introducing Mist, the only dentist-approved and recommended toothbrush powered by expansion radius technology, or XRT, for people who really care about their teeth and don't want to waste time with ordinary toothbrushes. It's extremely easy to use. Simply put it in your mouth and press the power button. In 30 seconds, you'll get the best mouth cleaning experience.
In 30 seconds, I can get all my brushing done.
Saves me a lot of time when I use Mist because it whitens, it scrubs, it gets the gums, it gets everywhere that I need.
My teeth feel amazingly clean and smooth. Perfectly crystal clear. My mouth feels at least 10 times better.
So my teeth actually feel really smooth. I love it. I went to the dentist and my dentist was shocked on how clean my teeth were.
The XRT technology that powers Mist is the first of its kind, delivering a complete cleaning of all your teeth simultaneously. No spot is left untouched or uncleaned.
The bristles get every part of my mouth within like 30 seconds.
The entire surface area of each tooth is brushed. Dentist-approved and recommended Mist also removes plaque with incredible power.
The Mist, I've been using it for about a month now, and it is great. I mean, I feel like I don't need my toothbrush anymore. Like, this thing is awesome.
Plaque begins to be removed with just one use of the Mist toothbrush. In addition to whitening toothpaste, you can also use a whitening gel in combination with the built-in LED blue light on the Mist toothbrush.
This is so gentle and nice, and it gets everything done at once.
The LED blue light on here turns on, and it whitens my teeth as I'm brushing. It's a whole setting in itself. Add your favorite whitening.
This really is an opportunity.
I mean, for everything that Mark has been through, it shows actually remarkable resilience to say, I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna prove that I can do this against all odds.
Yeah, I mean, well, my personal speak, it's aphasia. I can't speak. It's the words. It's tricky, but it's, you know, it's a tricky place.
So if we go back a little bit to when Mark first had his stroke, he was told quite categorically that very early on that he would never walk again, and it is this internal determination that's all part of commando training, really. Some of those those words that you'll hear: courage, determination, cheerfulness under adversity. What Mark's trying to do here is inspire others to an unrelenting pursuit of recovery, and this is absolutely what Mark's charity is all about. It's about reaching out to others and inspiring them to do things like this.
Yeah, and Mark, you just talk when you want to, and get Stuart doing it all when you don't. That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine by us. Don't you worry about it. But I said that what I'm always struck with when I've got quite a few connections with the military now, and when I talk to people like you and people who've been through some awful traumas, what always inspires me is the fact that you move forward not just looking for what is good for yourself, but really looking forward to what is going to help other people, and that is incredible that you can have that sort of attitude, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if we just go back a little bit to when Mark was going through his recovery, he went to Headley Court, which is the military rehabilitation centre, and it's my belief from all the conversations that I've had with Mark, is this is really where the Bauer Foundation was established. Mark will always remind me of a gentleman who was in a bed next door to him, who he said, you know, had literally given up hope. And this is about, you know, Mark saying, do you know what? Please, please, please don't give hope. Don't give up hope. Come with me. I can show you. I can inspire you. I can sprinkle some of that military pixie dust over you and help you with your recovery.
Yeah, which is really important, I think. Look, onto just a quick thought about the challenge itself. I mean, I don't know how much training you've done ready for this, Mark, but it's. I mean, the 3-peak challenge. They don't call it a challenge for nothing, do they? Are you ready? Are you ready to go? Yeah, good.
Yeah, this has been 20 years in the making for Mark. Throughout his military career. I mean, for the last 4 years, Mark has been, you know, steadfastly determined, and this really is the icing. This is the icing on the cake. This is the finale of last year's Bauer 1000, to actually get onto the summits of these 3 mountains and just.
Today on those brisk winds that will be strengthening throughout today across southern and western coasts. In particular, there could be gales or severe gales, and elsewhere I think the rain will be more showery in nature, but the heaviest downpours Northern Ireland, Northern England and for Wales for today, so very wet on the Default Coast.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we're going to be talking to Raymond Blanc about his restaurant's reopening and his new cookbook written in honour of his late mom.
Hamas are there. Hamas are the ones who are
stealing the future of Palestinian children. And that's the real tragedy.
Mr. Freeman, you made that point. My point is that you can argue justification and self-defense, but it's harder to argue that the scale of damage and bloodshed that you inflict is proportionate, isn't it? That's much harder to argue.
Well, we are doing everything we can, as I said, to avoid civilian casualties. We're using, the difference between us is this, that we use our weapons to defend our civilians, and Hamas uses their civilians to defend their weapons.
You're hitting
Hamas
hospitals and primary healthcare
weapons.
centres. You're hitting hospitals and primary healthcare centres.
Well, we're not.
How does that help you?
We are making sure that what we target are weapons supplies, and we are targeting where Hamas are putting their command and control centers. They're deliberately putting their weapon bases into next to schools, next to hospitals, into civilian areas. That's what Hamas do. And if we're going to try and stop Hamas from having these weapons and to give the Palestinians a better future, we need to destroy these weapon stores. And that's
yes,
what
but
we're
it doesn't
doing.
relieve you of the responsibility, even if they put their military installations close to hospitals. It doesn't relieve you of the responsibility of sparing those hospitals and medical centers in the conflict situation. You have that responsibility. You don't seem to be following that.
Well, as far as I'm aware, we haven't hit any hospitals in Gaza. There are two things that we do. Firstly, we check the number of civilians that are there, and if we see there are a number of civilians in the area, we call off any airstrike or anything that we're going to do because we want to avoid civilians. And we give warnings to all those in the area if we're going to destroy a building or we're going to destroy a command and control center, from phoning people, from giving warning shots in advance. We do everything we possibly can to avoid those casualties. And as you well know, Tim, when Western countries face and fight against a terror organization embedded in civilian populations, Israel is doing very well relatively in terms of avoiding civilian casualties compared to other Western countries who've had to face the same situation.
Mr. Freeman, let's take your destruction of the Gaza building which housed the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. You claim that Hamas also operated from there, but the NGO Reporters Without Borders says it has reason to believe your military intentionally targeted media organizations and intentionally destroyed their equipment. Is that true?
I completely reject that. That's a preposterous suggestion. Israel is known for a free and open press. You've been here a number of times yourselves. You know that the press here have complete freedom. We have a democratic system. We have debate. We have numbers of newspapers and televisions, and everybody is free to go about. We have absolutely nothing against the press. Quite the opposite. We encourage the press to operate here and to shine a light on things. If anything, it's Hamas who do not want the press and do not want people looking at what they're doing.
Well, Reporters Without Borders would challenge that. It said by the 17th of May, your forces had destroyed the offices of 23 international and local media organizations. That doesn't sound much like an accident, does it? More of a pattern, isn't it?
Well, the building that you referred to, we targeted because Hamas had a command and control center there. They were planning terrorist activities against the communities inside Israel, outside of the Gaza border. They were planning specific terror operations from within that building. In order to defend our citizens, we decided to stop them being able to attack us. We gave everybody plenty of warning and plenty of time before we destroyed their command and control
I'm not
center.
disputing that you gave a warning, but US Secretary of State Blinken has said he's now been given additional intelligence material about the attack on this building, but he has pointedly declined to support your declared motivation for this strike. My question is, will you assist an independent investigation which AP is calling for?
But we have provided, as you said, we provide intelligence information to our allies in America, which clearly show the status of that building being used by Hamas for terror organizations. And we hope that we will be able to, in the near future, declassify more of that information so that the world can see exactly how Hamas was cynically manipulating the media, manipulating the civilian infrastructure in order to put themselves in that building.
Mr. Freeman, let's just look at some of the background to this latest violence. There were weeks of clashes in East Jerusalem before the fighting began in the Gaza Strip and in some of your cities. Why were there no serious attempts to de-escalate the growing tensions?
Well, actually, we made a number of attempts to de-escalate the situation.
What, putting up barriers to stop Palestinians gathering in the evening at the Damascus gate? That was pretty inflammatory.
Well, and after a couple of days, we removed the barriers, but we took a number of other steps as well. We banned Jews from going to the Temple Mount, the holiest site in Judaism. We banned them from going up there, including during the Jerusalem Day. The Jerusalem Day parade that we hold every year, we changed the route of that. The court case that was going on in the Supreme Court, we delayed it for a month. The number of incendiary balloon attacks that were being fired over from Gaza, setting fires to vast swathes of agricultural land on the border inside Israel. And we didn't respond in any way to that. We did everything we possibly could to de-escalate, but Hamas...
Well, you didn't do everything, did you? Because you had police firing rubber bullets inside the mosque, the third holiest shrine in Islam, and in the middle of the holy month of Ramadan. Now, that wasn't calculated to calm tensions, was it?
Well, Tim, ever since Israel has been in control of the old city since 1967, we've guaranteed freedom of religion and freedom of worship. And every year, hundreds of thousands of Muslims come to the Temple Mount, and they pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims every year.
You're not answering my question. I'm talking about firing rubber bullets.
I'm coming to it. No, I'm coming to it. Hundreds of thousands of Muslims prayed peacefully. This year, for some reason, there were a small group of people, of agitators, dictated to by Hamas, who decided to gather stones and gather rocks and gather fireworks and gather flares and to throw them on the Jewish worshippers at the Western Wall below, to throw fireworks at them, to throw rocks at them, to attack the police who were in the area. And the police, like in any other country, decided to restore order because praying is something that we encourage. Praying and worship is something we want on the Temple Mount. Having a group of radicals and extremists who are going to be attacking and preventing people from worship, that's not acceptable. And we acted as any country would to restore law and order. Law and order is important in Israel.
And they say they were being provoked by Jewish extremists. Mr. Freeman, even as the fighting has gone on, the White House has signaled serious concern, not just about your evictions of Palestinians. You mentioned the ongoing court case, which was delayed, but about the frequent bulldozing of Palestinian homes. On May the 11th, Joe Biden's spokesperson said US officials had spoken candidly to you about these issues and about how those evictions and demolitions work against what she called our common interest in achieving a solution to the conflict. In other words, stop it. Are you going to stop it? These evictions and bulldozings?
The situation in Sheikh Jarrah is a complicated court case. We have a number of Palestinians who live in these buildings in Sheikh Jarrah, Palestinian Arabs who live in East Jerusalem, and there is an ongoing court case. And there's a number of them who say that they don't recognize the right of the Jewish people who say they own the building. There are a number of people who a number of years signed a lease with the people who own the building and therefore recognize but have stopped paying. It's gone through the courts for over 10 years. And the Supreme Court in Israel will make a ruling on this. And the Supreme Court and the judiciary in Israel is recognized as an independent judiciary, which is well respected throughout the world for its independence and for its jurisprudence. And
but it's not just Sheikh Jarrah. It's not just Sheikh Jarrah that the White House is talking about. Last year, according to the UN, you demolished 848 Palestinian structures in the West Bank and Jerusalem, displacing almost 1,000 people. As I said, according to the UN, are you going to stop doing this? Because this is what is causing concern at the White House, the highest levels of the US administration.
But we want to encourage a peace process and discussion with the Palestinians. When people are building illegally, then the civil authorities make sure that people don't build illegally. Those buildings can often be dangerous, they can be unstable, and they can cause a danger both to the inhabitants and to the people around them. But all of these issues that you're talking about need to be discussed in conversations with the Palestinians face to face. And the Palestinians are refusing again to come to negotiations with us. You know, my boss, the foreign minister, has called repeatedly for the Palestinians to come to the table and to enter negotiations with us and to move these issues forward. So that's really what we would like to see happen.
This White House wants a political settlement that leads to a two-state solution, but your government has no intention of allowing a sovereign Palestinian state to be created, does it?
Well, the first stage needs to be that the Palestinians come to the negotiating table. There's nothing to, we can't talk about what the end of the process until
well, yes,
we begin the process.
you can, because you've made clear, we've had a raft of contradictory statements from your government over the years about how they're not going to allow a Palestinian state. In 2015, your Prime Minister said, Benjamin Netanyahu said, if I'm elected, there won't be a Palestinian state. In 2017, he said, what I'm prepared to give the Palestinians isn't exactly a state with all the powers, but a state minus. And your cabinet minister, Tzachi Hanegbi, said last June, Israeli settlers don't need to worry because there will never be a Palestinian state. So that's why I ask you whether you have ruled out a two-state solution. It seems from these comments that you absolutely have.
Well, as I said to you, the important thing is to start the negotiations and see where the negotiations go. But it's also
they've already ruled out. They've already set boundaries to the negotiations.
We also need to see what any Palestinian state would be. If a Palestinian state is going to be Gaza, or it's going to be Syria, or it's going to be Iraq, or it's going to be another failed state that doesn't have any rights and has internal conflict and war and bombings and terrorism, and attacking Israel as a neighbor, then that's certainly not in the interest of Israel. I would argue it's not in the interest of the Palestinians, and it's not in the interest of the neighborhood. So we have to establish exactly what form of state we're talking about, and we have to have negotiations with the Palestinians. And if the Palestinians are willing to talk to us and to negotiate with us, I am sure that we will come to an answer and something that works both for Israel and the Palestinians. It needs to satisfy the needs of both the Israelis and the Palestinians.
You've already given your answers with the quotes I just gave you. President Biden said last week he wants to see steps to enable the Palestinian people to enjoy dignity, security, and freedom, the implication being that they don't have any of those things. When is Israel going to take those steps?
Well, we would like to see the same thing. I want to see the Palestinians to have a better future. I want to see them have freedom. I want to see them have all of those things that you mentioned, Tim. But at the moment, as you know, Gaza is controlled by Hamas. The Palestinian areas are controlled by the Palestinian Authority. They haven't had free elections in 15 years in those areas. They're in Gaza, Hamas, who've received billions of dollars of aid, instead of spending that money on hospitals, on schools, on even vaccines for COVID, they've spent that money on building terror networks, on building rockets, on building tunnels. For the Palestinians to have a better future, which is it's in my interest. I want the Palestinians to have a better future. I want their children to have the same hopes and the same opportunities that my children have. But in order to do that, they need to have a leadership that also wants their best, that also has their best interest in heart.
If you genuinely wanted those things you were talking about, you'd do something about the fact that millions of Palestinians in the occupied territories have no right to elect the government whose army rules over them. Even Palestinians who are permanent residents of Jerusalem can't take part in national elections. Why not?
Well, the Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza can take part in elections if the Palestinian Authority would have them. In 2006 was the last elections they had.
I'm talking about elections for the government of Israel. I'm talking about elections for the government of Israel, the occupying power in West Bank and East Jerusalem. As Senator Bernie Sanders, himself a Jew, put it over the weekend, Israel remains the one sovereign authority in the land of Israel and Palestine, and rather than preparing for peace and justice, it's been entrenching its unequal and undemocratic control. I suppose you'd say he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, I think we have to separate between Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. Inside Israel, every citizen, Jew, Arab, Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter who, has the right to vote, has full democratic rights. You know, as you know, we've had 4 elections in the last 2 years.
I'm talking about the millions of Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem who don't have these rights and live under Israeli occupation.
But the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza have autonomy and have their own elections for their own leadership. The fact that their leadership haven't held elections in 15 years is not an issue that Israel has to deal with. That's an issue for the Palestinian leadership. The Palestinians and the world and the Palestinians ask for autonomy on a step of the process. Under the Oslo Accords, they got that autonomy and they got that process. The fact they haven't had an election in 15 years surely can't be blamed on Israel.
We're not talking about their elections, we're talking about their rights to take part in yours. The latest human rights report
but
from
they're not part of, but Tim,
they are under your occupation, they are under your effective
The Palestinians
rule.
living in the West Bank aren't Israeli citizens, and as you said yourself,
they are
don't
under
want to
your
be Israeli
effective
citizens.
rule because, as your Supreme Court told you back in 2004, you hold that area in belligerent occupation. And now you're telling me you don't have any responsibility for it.
In agreement, but in international agreements we sign with the Palestinians and with the Palestinian Authority, they are the responsible people. They're meant to hold elections, and they haven't held elections for their own people.
You seem to be avoiding the fact that the latest State Department human rights report 2 months ago highlighted widespread discrimination suffered by Palestinians and other minorities under your effective rule. Have you read this report, or don't you bother with it?
Of course, we read all the reports.
So you will know that it says Arab Muslims, along with Christians, Druze and Ethiopian citizens, face persistent institutional and societal discrimination. Exactly the same criticism that it flags up year after year, about which Israel does precisely nothing. Why is that?
Well, I don't agree that Israel does nothing. I think that Israel is taking significant steps to address these issues. But you're right, like other countries in the world, we have faults. You know, every country, every democratic country in the world has faults. We aren't perfect. I'm not here to tell you that Israel's a perfect country.
It's not just faults, it's massive discrimination against the Palestinians.
But we've got problems and we've got challenges, and if you're talking about Israeli Arabs and you're talking about other minorities within Israel, it's an issue that we have to deal with, and it's an issue we're challenging. And for example, in the area of...
But you've been warned about this for years and you've ignored it. You've been warned about this for years.
Well, I don't think we have ignored it. For example, in higher education, in the last 7 years, there's been an 80% increase in the number of Israeli Arabs who are going into higher education. There are programs to invest significantly in the last 3 to 5 years. The amount of money that we've invested in the Arab sector in society is greater than anything we've invested ever before. We are consistently working on these issues. But you're right, Tim.
Well, what about healthcare, for instance? What about healthcare, for instance?
Well,
the report says that although the law provides that all residents of Jerusalem are fully and equally eligible for public services, the municipality and other authorities failed to provide sufficient social services, education infrastructure and emergency planning for Palestinian neighborhoods. Why that discrimination, Mr. Freeman? Why?
Well, because, as I said to you, we're working to address some of these issues. But if we take, just as an example, the recent COVID outbreak and the vaccination campaign that Israel ran, our most successful campaign, we vaccinated every single Israeli, whether they were Jew, whether they were Arab, they were Christian, Muslim, every single person was vaccinated. It didn't matter who they were or where they were. They were vaccinated according to age and only according to age. And then as they went down, everybody's been vaccinated. And that's the reason that today we don't have COVID as a serious issue inside Israel, because our entire population, every single person, Jew, Arab, from Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, from the north of the country, the south of the country, everybody's been vaccinated, including, by the way, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that we've also vaccinated.
And a lot of Palestinians in the West Bank and East Jerusalem who were turned out of their houses in the middle of the pandemic. You don't mention that. Mr. Freeman, in the time we've got left, if the Biden administration offers to restart talks, will you sit down and address the institutional and societal discrimination to which the US, your closest ally, says you've subjected the Palestinians? Will you do that?
We keep calling on the Palestinians to return to negotiations and to have discussions with us. So if anybody can bring the Palestinians to the table, then that would be a positive thing. We need the Palestinian Authority to do that. We need them to come to the table and say they are willing to talk to us and willing to discuss a better future for Israelis and for Palestinians. We're certainly in favor of that.
A few years ago, your former Prime Minister Ehud Barak warned you that if the occupation continued, Israel, he said, would inevitably become either non-Jewish or non-democratic. Human rights groups say you've chosen the non-democratic option. Donald Trump didn't mind that, but it seems that Biden and his party do mind. Are you ready for a rocky ride with this administration?
Look, Israel and America have a very, very strong relation. We have a very strong relation with President Biden and the Biden administration. And we've seen over the last couple of days and the last couple of weeks, America and President Biden's steadfast support for Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. And that's, you know, Israel and America relations are bipartisan issues.
And far less
we're based
steadfast,
on values, and we're based at
far less steadfast support from the US Congress, particularly from Democratic senators who have now floated the idea of holding up arms shipments to you because they don't like what you've been doing with the Palestinians over the last few days. That's new. That hasn't happened before.
The relationship with Israel and America is long-standing, and it's bipartisan, and it really does cross both the parties in America, and we see a...
You're not addressing the criticism. The criticism has been intense from parts of the Democratic Party. You know that.
Look, as I said to you, we have a very strong relationship with the Democratic Party, which is historic. You know, when I come into the office every single day, into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, downstairs is the very pen that was used by President Truman to sign the recognition of the State of Israel.
Mr. Freeman,
and that's a Democratic president.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Forces of the ocean and extremely dangerous. Tsunamis. More and more people live in coastal areas where, in an emergency, every second counts. Researchers are getting to the bottom of this natural phenomenon. But what protection is there against tsunamis? Danger from the depths.
In 15 minutes on DW.
The smugglers were liars. If I had known that the boat would be that small, I never would have gone on the trip. I would not have put myself and my parents in that danger.
I had serious problems on a personal level, and I was unable to live there.
You want to know their story? Info Migrants, verified and reliable information for migrants.
It's an ongoing quest for a better future.
The Arab Spring began in 2011. People stood up against corrupt rulers and dictatorship.
All these moments have left deep marks in my memory.
There was a huge joy. It was an incredible feeling. The people were liberated.
They had hoped for more security, more freedom, more dignity. Have their hopes been fulfilled? Where does the Arab world stand today, 10 years after the Arab Spring? Arabellion starts June 7th on DW.
This is DW News, live from Berlin. Germany joins desperate efforts to stop the bombing in Gaza and Israel. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas flies into the war zone, attempting to broker a ceasefire, even as the fighting continues. Israel is pounding Gaza, while militants keep up their overnight attacks. Also coming up, pressure on the border. Morocco steps up security near Ceuta, dispersing people attempting to enter Spain's North African enclave. We hear from some of the thousands who are trying to swim around the barrier. And opposition to the Tokyo Olympics grows as Japan sees a spike in new COVID-19 cases. But the head of the International Olympic Committee insists the Summer Games will go on. I'm Anya Kupis-McKinnon. Thanks so much for joining us. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas is in Israel today, and he will later also visit the Palestinian territories in the hope of brokering a peace agreement between the two parties. Overnight, more rockets were fired from Gaza, injuring several people, and Israel launched another series of airstrikes early this morning, with at least one death reported. Despite this, a senior Hamas official says he expects his group will reach a ceasefire with Israel within, quote, a day or two. Since the fighting started 10 days ago, more than 200 people have been killed, and many of those victims are children.
A young girl rescued from what was once her family's home, destroyed in an airstrike. She was buried in the rubble for hours as her siblings and mother died around her, calling for help. 2 days later, she's recovering with her father in hospital, severely traumatized. Her name is Susie.
I heard the voice of my children from beneath the rubble calling me. I heard my son's voice calling, "Dad, Dad," before he suddenly became silent. He's 2.5 years old, and my daughter was calling me, "Dad, Dad." A few words, then she went silent too.
The Israeli army has been shelling the Gaza Strip, targeting Hamas's tunnel systems there. They reported that they took aim at about 50 targets, but there's no guarantee there won't be innocent deaths.
I have to say, we don't rule out anything. We hope we can restore quiet. We hope we can restore it quickly. I want to say that we're doing that while doing our utmost to avoid civilian casualties.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called for an immediate end to the fighting. The attacks and destruction in Gaza are Israeli occupation-led state terrorism, a war crime that is punishable by international law. However, an end to hostilities in the Middle East still seems a long way off. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Susie still isn't talking. She's only just started to eat and drink again. The doctors say they can't get her the psychological help she needs because of the fighting. If any victims are innocent here, it's the children.
And for more of this, we're going to cross straight to DW correspondent Tanya Kremer, who is standing by in Jerusalem for us. Tanya, we understand that there have been no rocket sirens since 1 a.m. in Israel. Is this possibly a sign that the hostilities are decreasing?
Well, There was no rocket fire for several hours, but rocket fire has resumed in the past hour or so. There have been several launches towards the southern part of Israel, mainly areas surrounding and towns surrounding the Gaza Strip. At the same time, we saw that in the report, Israel had continued its airstrike during the night, especially in the morning hours. So, of course, there is some speculation, because there was a long period of quiet, that this might be a sign or a sign of willingness to quietening down the strikes, at least from the side, from the Gaza side. But at the moment, you know, it has resumed from both sides. You know, we can only speculate whether this, whether this will lead to any kind of ceasefire anytime soon.
And yet, Hamas says that they expect to reach a ceasefire with Israel within a day or two, they say. Is that plausible at all?
Well, there are a lot of conflicting reports and also a lot of speculations, but we have seen such reports also in the past days, and now there are reports saying that a possible ceasefire might be possible maybe by Friday, but nothing is confirmed. We understand that Egypt, as one of the main mediators, is stepping up its efforts. That is also, of course, happening all behind the scenes. You know, the details are being hammered out, but it's not clear, you know, if such a ceasefire would happen. Is it just a formula, for example, quiet for quiet, or will there be some more conditions from either side? So nothing confirmed on that front. We saw a bit of quietening down, but it could, as we see, start at any moment again. And also the position of Israel, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying they would continue carrying out strikes. It's not clear how they stand with regards to a possible ceasefire anytime soon.
Now, the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas is in the region this morning. Can you tell us how significant it is having him there, obviously putting on pressure for a ceasefire?
Well, he's not the only foreign minister coming today. We also expect the Slovakian foreign minister and the foreign minister from the Czech Republic. So from what we hear from the Israeli side, the foreign minister Gabi Ashkenazi, who has welcomed the German foreign minister Heiko Maas this morning, they see this as a visit of support, a visit of solidarity. The German foreign minister Heiko Maas has said he had also in previous days spoken with counterparts in Doha, in Amman and in Cairo, so it's clear that the mediation efforts here are based in the region. But at the same time, you know, we've seen a lot of calls for the de-escalation here and for ending the hostilities from several countries, also from EU countries, but that hasn't translated really in anything here on the ground to come closer to a ceasefire.
All right, DW's Tanya Kremer in Jerusalem. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at some other stories making headlines at this hour. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has held his first meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Iceland. They said their countries can find ways to work together despite their differences. Lavrov called the talks constructive and said preparations would begin for a possible meeting between the two countries' leaders. Demonstrators have clashed with police in the Colombian city of Medellin as nationwide protests entered their fourth week. They were triggered by a government plan to raise taxes, but have since been fueled by anger over poverty, inequality and police violence. More than 40 people have been killed in a security crackdown. Protests have taken place in Denmark against the repatriation of Syrian refugees. Authorities recently revoked the residency permits of more than 200 Syrians. Many have lived in Denmark for years. Earlier this year, the Danish government declared parts of Syria safe enough for refugees to return. Now, clashes have broken out between Moroccan security forces and people attempting to reach European territory by swimming around border fences. This week, thousands of would-be migrants forced their way into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta in North Africa. Morocco appeared to have loosened its border controls with the territory following a diplomatic dispute with Spain. But security has now been stepped up.
Desperation just outside of Ceuta. Would-be migrants scuffled with Moroccan security forces, pushing them back. They were blocking the border of the Spanish enclave. As day turned to night, clashes broke out. Police eventually managed to regain control and disperse the crowds of mostly young men. The desire to get across the border is great. Migrants who reach the Spanish enclave often say they have no choice but to leave Morocco. We come here to look for a better future than in my country. There we have no rights or anything. There's nothing, no work, nothing. But what are you going to do? Local Spanish residents say the situation is tense. Many feel overwhelmed. Currently, there's so many arriving, it's really unusual. We're in a kind of state of emergency here, and many residents are really afraid. Personally, I feel safe out on the street. I'm not afraid, but I'm a teacher, and at the moment many of my pupils are not coming to classes because they're scared. Those attempting to swim to Ceuta are now immediately picked up by Spanish soldiers. The number of people crossing into Ceuta reached a peak earlier this week, with some 8,000 entering in a single day. Spain has since deployed the army to patrol the border and send the migrants back.
Señor Presidente.
Speaking to Parliament in Madrid, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez vowed to restore order and said that nearly 5,000 migrants had been returned.
I remind you that the border with Ceuta is not only a border between Spain and Morocco, but also a European border, and that in this case the lack of control by the Moroccan authorities is not only a lack of respect towards Spain, but also towards the European Union.
Officials in Madrid say they are reinforcing Ceuta's borders to prevent more arrivals.
DW correspondent Jan-Philipp Scholz is in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta and says that tensions there are likely to continue.
It seems like a simple fence between Morocco and Spain, but it has become an important symbol of world politics over the past days. Thousands of migrants have swum across the border. You can still see some of their clothes here. It seems like the price that Spain has to pay for outsourcing some of its border protection and paying millions of euros to Morocco to prevent migrants from passing the border. Now, during a diplomatic dispute, Morocco has started to make use of its power and has started to let migrants pass. Thousands have arrived over the past days, and the challenge doesn't seem to be over.
To Tokyo now, where a spike in COVID-19 cases is fueling demands for the cancellation of this summer's Olympics and Paralympics. Doctors have also joined calls to stop the events, but the head of the International Olympic Committee insists the already delayed games will open in July.
The IOC's Thomas Bach in the upper left loomed large over the start of the Tokyo meeting, insisting the games will go on.
We are now fully focused on the delivery of the Olympic Games.
It is, after all, Bach's International Olympic Committee holding the ultimate say into whether to hold the Games. The host city contract says so, signed by all interested parties in 2013 when Tokyo won the rights to host. In the termination section, it says the IOC has sole discretion to terminate should safety be threatened. In the midst of a brutal fourth wave of coronavirus infections, poll after poll show a clear majority in favor of terminating the Games over fears it could become a super spreader event. Bach, some said, should cancel the Olympics while in Tokyo for this week's meeting. He actually stayed home, though, in Switzerland. The fact Bach isn't coming means he cannot come, and that implicitly recognizes Japan's emergency situation. To show all will be well for the Japanese people during the Olympics and Paralympics, Bach points to event rehearsals in which athletes competed and were housed in a strict bubble. And he added, most teams will now bring additional health professionals should coronavirus infections occur.
With our Japanese partners and friends, I can only re-emphasize this full commitment of the IOC to organize together safe Olympic and Paralympic Games for everybody.
Momentum, so important in many sports events, is not on Bach's side at the moment, but it's still the IOC's call whether to cancel the games, which have cost at least $15 billion and are now just over 2 months away.
You're watching DW News. Here's a reminder of our top story. Germany's foreign minister has joined diplomatic efforts to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas militants. Bombings have continued from both sides, with more Israeli airstrikes and rockets fired from Gaza into Israel. Stay tuned for our documentary film looking at the hidden dangers of tsunamis. Thanks so much for watching DW News.
A mysterious code. A highly intelligent species. An expedition looking to decipher the secret language of whales. We accompany a research team to the Pacific to decode the language of whales. Starts June 4th on DW.
Tsunamis. Deadly waves that have the power to destroy entire cities in a matter of moments. There was little public awareness about them until December 26, 2004. That was the day a gigantic tsunami in the Indian Ocean killed more than 230,000 people. Images illustrating the force of this natural phenomenon shocked the world. 7 years later, in 2011, a nuclear power plant in Fukushima, Japan, exploded after being engulfed by an earthquake-generated tsunami. Since these tragedies, scientists rushed to the scene, redoubling efforts to determine what causes these killer waves. Because that knowledge can save lives. It's clear that tsunamis can strike any region of the planet. Urbanization has made coastal communities even more vulnerable. Can tsunami research protect them? On Friday, September 28, 2018, an earthquake followed by a tsunami devastated an area of the Bay of Palu on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. Within minutes, 4,000 people lost their lives. 79,000 others had to be evacuated. How could this new disaster in Indonesia occur after the devastating 2004 tsunami? 2 tsunami specialists were commissioned by UNESCO and the Indonesian authorities to investigate. Kostas Sinolakis of the University of Southern California and Herman Fritz of the Georgia Institute of Technology have arrived to conduct field research.
Quite impressive to see the devastation. We're now 3 weeks after the event. And here we can kind of see why it's important to come up as quickly as possible, or at least once the emergency is over, because a lot of bulldozing in this area already, so a lot of evidence is already lost.
The researchers will be combing the debris for traces of the wave. Time is of the essence. Cleanup operations have already erased valuable evidence, and the monsoon rains are due to start soon.
Working as a tsunami scientist is very much like being a detective on a crime scene. There is multiple murders that have taken place. You really have to piece, like in a puzzle, the sequence of events. Did the tsunami hit first and this made the houses collapse, or were they collapsed because of the earthquake and the tsunami finished them off? What were the people doing? Why is it that some people died and some people did not?
The two researchers want to determine how the disaster unfolded. Their goal? To trace the tsunami back to the event that triggered the wave. Kostas Sinolakis goes to meet survivors in the small fishing town of Wani. When the wave hit, Abdul Latif was on his boat 100 meters from the shore.
Get off the boat. When the first wave came and there was a big tremor, I went out on deck. Did you feel the tremors on the boat? Yes. The whole boat was rocking because the water level had dropped and the boat had run aground.
What did he do at the time? He stayed with the boat?
Did you stay on the boat? I held onto the mast. And then I saw the wave approaching in the distance. It was very fast. It reached the boat in no time at all and pushed us onto land. Roughly how high was it? I could see my house. The roof was almost at the same height as the boat. Where's your house? Over there. The wave was about 5 to 6 meters high as my house.
Kostas Sinolakis is puzzled. How could a 5-meter-high wave have crashed onto the shore here in a bay that up until now had not been seen as a tsunami hazard zone? "20 kilometers south of Wani, Herman Fritz is conducting research in Palu. Tucked away at the back of the bay, the town is home to 350,000 residents. Thousands of people lost their lives here. Accompanied by 2 Indonesian colleagues, Herman Fritz drives to the parking lot of a shopping centre overlooking the bay. His investigation into the dynamics of the wave relies heavily on videos from mobile phones.
This is the exact spot that we saw on the video. Here you can see the billboard.
Yes. Tsunami wave coming, people running away.
People running away. Oh.
And that's the second wave.
That's the second wave.
Okay, that's the highest one. So now we can basically see how high the water is, almost on top of the billboard.
The wave reached a height of more than 4 meters.
Okay, 4 up there. Okay.
To determine the cause of the tsunami, Herman Fritz first needs to create a computer model of the devastating wave. For this, he has to determine its height at different points in the city and measure how far it spread inland.
I'm going to try to do some detailed surveying here, so we're going to try to get a full 3D scan. And the purpose of that is that we get a 3D space, basically the LiDAR scans all the point cloud, and we can see how the wave goes through it. So can we measure how high the wave is at every given instance, and how fast the wave is moving across through the houses, washing away the houses, and across the street.
Herman Fritz follows the wave's traces. After flooding the parking lot, it swept deep into the city. Evidence of the force of the wave can be found in this mosque, located just 100 meters from the shore.
This one's broken. We have this grill here, and we see this rafted debris inside. So we know that the tsunami was at least to this height of this rack. And then up here we see the actual primary tsunami line, which is this one right here. And we can also see it in the window. If you look at the blue sky, we actually see a mud line going through there. And then we look at that over here, we also see the mud line coming around, coming around, coming around. So the tsunami is coming pretty much at the height of my head through this mosque. And that's also a very difficult height already, because usually when the water is to this height, you cannot stand anymore. You will be thrown to the ground by the water, so it can be difficult to survive.
After 3 days of field work, the 2 American researchers and their Indonesian colleagues can now produce their first simulation of the tsunami that hit the Bay of Palu. They established that the strongest wave cut a path 300 meters inland. But Kostas Sinolakis and Herman Fritz are only at the start of their investigation. They now have to identify the event that triggered the deadly wave and find out how it could have swept into the bay. Su means the port, Nami, the waves that destroy the port. This word, now in universal use, dates from the 17th century. It comes from the place on the planet most frequently affected by tsunamis, Japan. It was coined by fishermen when, returning to shore on a storm-free day, they discovered the waves had leveled their villages. The last tsunami to hit Japan caused the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011. It was triggered by a seaquake measuring 9.1 on the Richter scale. The wave killed more than 18,000 people.
A tsunami has no meteorological cause. The primary cause of tsunamis are earthquakes and seaquakes.
The vast majority of tsunamis are generated by seaquakes, which in turn are triggered by the Earth's tectonic activity. The Earth's crust is composed of several large plates. The movement of magma pushes them against one another, a few millimeters to a few centimeters a year. The oceanic plates slide beneath the continental plates, creating subduction zones. Friction between the plates can cause deformation of the continental plate, which accumulates a gigantic amount of energy. When this energy is released, it can cause a huge undersea earthquake.
The earthquake suddenly puts all the water in motion. At a depth of 4 kilometers, we have 4,000 meters of water moving at the speed of a passenger plane. The wave slows down near the coast, but increases in size. That creates waves like we saw in 2011, 20 to 30 meters high.
You cannot separate earthquake signs and tsunami signs. The longer the duration of the earthquake gives a very good indication of how strong the earthquake is. It's like a zipper. If you have a small earthquake, it's a short rupture area. And that means the duration is shorter. If it's a big earthquake like Sumatra, magnitude 9, or Japan, magnitude 9 plus events, then basically you have a very long zipper. That means the shaking will go on for several minutes.
Jesus Christ, look at that. Hell. That wave is a good 15, 20 feet tall. Easy.
The longer and stronger an undersea quake, the more powerful the tsunami it triggers, as in the Indian Ocean sea quake of December 26, 2004. A fault located 100 kilometers off Banda Aceh on the Indonesian island of Sumatra ruptured along a length of 1,200 kilometers. The massive 9.1 magnitude undersea quake lasted more than 5 minutes. Within 15 minutes, the first waves, up to 35 meters high, smashed into Sumatra, while other large waves rippled across the Indian Ocean. In all, 230,000 people lost their lives. The wave's advance was captured for the first time on video by hundreds of people caught up in the disaster. The world was shocked by this devastating show of natural force, a force little understood at the time. For scientists, it was a wake-up call. energizing research into tsunamis, then still in its infancy. Since 2008, UNESCO has maintained a global tsunami tracker. It's a record of tsunami occurrences over the past 3 millennia. To date, researchers have identified 1,200. The least destructive are in white, the most deadly in red. Each of these dots represents a potential danger for the future. 70% of tsunamis are located along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where most of the Earth's subduction zones are located. In Palu, Kostas Sinolakis and Herman Fritz are continuing their research. A tsunami early warning system was set up here after the 2004 disaster. So why were there so many victims in 2018?
There were a lot of vendors here selling food. It was really busy. First we heard a rumble. The people started screaming, "The water's rising."
This eyewitness says the crowds in the roads near the beach were caught totally off guard by the wave. No warning sounded here. Our investigation continues at the Tsunami Monitoring Center in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. This control tower monitors seismic activity across Indonesia, including the Bay of Palu. Seismologists here can detect any undersea earthquake in real time. Advanced algorithms allow them to simulate the formation of a tsunami and warn coastal communities before the first wave hits. Since its introduction in 2008, the system has issued 22 alerts, saving countless lives. Why then did Palu fail to receive a warning on September 28, 2018? Kian Punasingki was the seismologist on duty that night.
The earthquake in Palu registered a magnitude of 7 for 2 minutes. Then just afterward, the magnitude rose to 7.7. I instantly ran to the TOAS table where we simulate tsunamis.
The center in Jakarta registered an earthquake 80 kilometers north of Palu Bay early in the evening.
The epicenter is here, and here's Palu.
According to the simulation, the tsunami risk posed by this earthquake was only moderate. Nevertheless, an alert was triggered within the prescribed time limit, 5 minutes after the earthquake. So what went wrong? Kostas Sinolakis will discover the answer with the help of 2 private surveillance cameras. Friday, September 28th, 6:02 p.m. The earthquake hits the Bay of Palu. It lasts longer than 2 minutes.
How did you experience the earthquake? It was incredible. You couldn't stand up? Impossible. I was there under camera 2. I was hanging onto the gate. Then it calmed down and I went out.
Did it cross his mind that after the earthquake, because he's so close to the water, perhaps a tsunami will come?
They've always said a bay is a bay. It doesn't have tsunamis. That it's in the open sea where they occur. Yet it happened here.
These images provide the researchers with key evidence on the chronology of events. The time on the CCTV footage reveals that barely 2 minutes elapsed between the end of the earthquake and the onset of the tsunami. Such rapid succession had never been recorded before. The tsunami warning issued in Jakarta went out after the wave hit Palu, when all of its communication systems were already down.
What is very alarming to me is that here, the earthquake triggered the tsunami very quickly. So we need to understand how this happens, and also what is the timing, how quickly after the earthquake hits, the tsunami comes in.
According to the Jakarta Centre's simulations, it should have taken a wave generated near the epicenter, 80 kilometers north of the bay, about 15 minutes to reach Palu. How was it possible for this wave to advance with such speed and force on the Bay of Palu? To find answers, the researchers take to the air.
It's extremely important to us to have a bird's eye view of the entire place, because by being up on the air in a helicopter, it allows us to see how this wave came in and see the extent of the inundation.
The scientists are struck by what they see. There are alternating areas of devastation and intactness, but that's not all.
So once you get outside of the bay, the wave disappears very quickly, and you're looking at very beautiful Indonesian beaches. So that already allows to confine the zone where to look for further for the sources to inside the bay.
If the wave that devastated Palu had formed out in the open sea, the entire coast would have been affected. Herman Fritz and Kostas Sinolakis doubt the deadly wave was generated at the epicenter identified by the Jakarta Warning Center. They believe the source of the tsunami must have lain inside the bay itself. Herman Fritz and his Indonesian colleague, Gaza Prasetya, returned to the west coast to gauge how a tsunami could have originated in this sheltered area. Gaza Prasetya has received new footage that was filmed nearby.
The bird is still over there, the same position. Yeah. So then you can see also the background of these events, and then this is when they started the landslide.
Yeah, local landslide. Close seismic triggered by the earthquake. You have a small semicircular wave that you can even see in the video. Yeah. So I think this is going to be a localized impact from this landslide tsunami. You have a lot of alluvial material here, so I think once you shake it, it will go.
For Herman Fritz, the low intensity of this first wave suggests it was triggered by a coastal landslide. But that alone doesn't explain what caused the tsunami that devastated the bay.
Here we have evidence because we have a coastal scarp. Okay, so the scarp actually is along the shoreline. The land went into the ocean, and so we have a coastal landslide. I don't think this localized tsunami is big enough to be the main source of the tsunami that wiped away Palu or Vani on the other side of the bay.
Surveying the entire bay, researchers discover several other similar landslides. All of them could have triggered mini tsunamis. But it's only when the team looks further inland that it finds the missing piece of the puzzle.
Look, this is remarkable. This is the trench. Tremors opened it, then closed it, and opened it again.
A few hundred meters further on, a second witness points out the extent of the destruction.
The entire row of houses collapsed. All of the houses collapsed at the same time, from south to north, as you can see by the slope of that house there.
A deep fault line opened up, cutting clear through the town, causing the buildings to collapse. It continues on into the bay for many more kilometers. Finally, researchers have the answer. It is this fault line that caused the Palu tsunami. After 5 days out in the field and months of data analysis, the sequence of events has at last been pieced together. On September 28, 2018, at 6:02 p.m., a 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck 80 kilometers north of Palu. The epicenter, correctly identified by the Tsunami Monitoring Center in Jakarta, did not directly trigger the tsunami. The seismic waves traveled through the Earth's crust at the extremely high speed of 900 kilometers per hour, generating a fault that opened up across the entire bay. That triggered landslides all along the coast, which in turn generated a series of mini tsunamis. The energy of all these mini tsunamis accumulated in the depression of the bay, combining to form a powerful wave that swept across the town. Herman Fritz and Kostas Sinolakis' investigation has come to an end. Their reconstruction of the Bay of Palu tsunami will help improve warning systems all over the world.
We used to think that tsunamis only strike in areas where you have subduction zones. We now know, just like what happened here, that tsunamis can strike pretty much any place where you can have an earthquake. We are very concerned about this because similar earthquakes could take place in Seattle, they could take place in Southern California, they could take place in the Caribbean, and they could take place in the Mediterranean.
What walls of water, what winds, what thunder, what a horrible earthquake, what a frightening sound of the sea, and the howling of a great people. These words by the Italian poet Petrarch describe a strange storm over the city of Naples in the 14th century. 700 years later, volcanologist Mauro Rosi was intrigued by Petrarch's description. Rosi has worked on Naples' emergency plan in case Mount Vesuvius erupts. Most tsunamis are generated by seaquakes and fault lines, but they can also be triggered by volcanic eruptions.
Petrarch witnessed an exceptional phenomenon that struck the city of Naples. He was asleep not far from the port when he heard such loud, strange noises that he thought it was an earthquake. Petrarch rushed to the harbor like so many other people and saw with his own eyes that it had been completely devastated.
Aside from his descriptions of the destruction, Petrarch also wrote of hundreds of dead and dozens of sunken ships. To Mauro Rosi, it's obvious that this strange storm was a tsunami.
At that time, Petrarch could not have known that it was a tsunami, because it was an unknown phenomenon in the Middle Ages. Today, we are certain it was a tsunami.
To avoid a repeat of the catastrophe, the volcanologist has been searching for the cause of the tsunami that wrecked Naples Harbor in 1343. There's no record of a 14th century eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the Gulf of Naples. So Mauro Rosi has focused on another volcano. Located 200 kilometers from Naples, Stromboli is one of the most active in the region. In 2002, an eruption caused a flank of the mountain to collapse into the sea. A 10-meter high tidal wave wreathed the island. The wave spread across the Tyrrhenian Sea and, much weakened, reached the Bay of Naples. Could a far more powerful eruption of Stromboli have triggered the tsunami described by Petrarch 700 years ago? Above the village of San Vincenzo on the slopes of the volcano, archaeologist Sara Levi is excavating the remains of a small church. She's provided Mauro Rosi with his first clues.
We knew that a dramatic event led to the sudden collapse of the building, probably a powerful earthquake, because we found large blocks of stone inside on the church floor.
In order to date Stromboli's past activity, archaeologists examined 3 skeletons found in the remains of the church.
This skeleton was in a grave pit that was dug through the layer of collapsed tiles that fell down when the church collapsed. So this person was definitely a witness of the catastrophe, possibly a victim, possibly a survivor. This skeleton has been dated by carbon-14 in the middle decades of the 14th century.
The date of the earthquake that shook the island of Stromboli coincides with the tsunami disaster described by Petrarch in the Bay of Naples.
When the church collapsed, it was not rebuilt, which is surprising and indicates a major change in human occupation at this location. It is likely that the island was abandoned until the 1600s.
The event was so traumatic that the island of Stromboli remained uninhabited for 10 generations and more than 200 years. Following these revelations, Mauro Rossi began his own excavations. He hoped to find clues linking the activity of the volcano to the tsunami described by Petrarch in 1343. More than 4 meters underground, the volcanologist finally discovered an intriguing mix of sedimentary deposits.
This tsunami deposit is by far the largest we've found, and we've dated it to 1350, as evidenced by the materials in it. Look at the size of these perfectly round pebble stones. They must have come from the beach. The presence of such large-sized elements proves that the tsunami was extraordinarily powerful.
For the volcanologist, it all makes sense. The powerful wave that flushed these large pebbles 200 meters inland from the beach occurred at precisely the same time as the earthquake that destroyed the small island church. There is a clear link between the eruption of the volcano and the tsunami. La Sciara del Fuoco. It's on this impressive flank that all the volcanic material ejected by Stromboli accumulates. 700 years ago, an eruption may well have sparked a landslide on the Sciara del Fuoco. That would have hurled many millions of tons of accumulated debris into the sea, triggering the tsunami that reached the Bay of Naples.
Given Stromboli's current activity, we believe the load of debris presently accumulated on the Sciara del Fuoco is comparable to levels at the time of the tsunami described by Petrarch.
For Mauro Rossi, the landslide caused by the 2019 eruption was just a harbinger of a much more serious disaster to come. The Sciara del Fuoco, he says, could collapse into the sea at any moment. The island of Stromboli is under 24-hour surveillance to alert authorities, residents and tourists in the event of danger. But what consequences would a tsunami have on a city the size of Naples?
In rapporto alla possibilità che ci sia uno tsunami che possa provenire dall'isola di Stromboli. People are completely unaware that a tsunami from Stromboli could hit Naples. Sia assolutamente zero. Quando I fenomeni naturali hanno delle ricorrenze. In the case of rare natural phenomena, people tend to believe that there is no imminent danger. Sensazione che questo sia un pericolo incombente.
A computer-generated model tracks the course of the 1343 tsunami. It gives an idea of what could be in store for Naples.
Occorrerebbero verosimilmente solo 30 minuti. It would take under 30 minutes for the tsunami to reach the Gulf of Naples from Stromboli. The devastation would be unimaginable. All the boats in the harbor behind me would be hurled onto the streets. The water would gush into the subway and drown all of the passengers. The busy streets would be submerged. It would be apocalyptic. But that's exactly what would happen without an early warning system.
Earthquakes, landslides, volcanic eruptions, all of these natural phenomena can trigger tsunamis. Research carried out over the last 15 years has provided a better understanding of the threat. It's also helped perfect warning systems and better adapt them to the specific
الكهرباء، قطع النت، قطعوا البديل، هذا كله هذا ودمروا وما فيش شيء هنا يعني.
نايمين بأمان الله، لا معنا خبر ولا أي شيء، ما سمعنا إلا هالجد وطارت الدار، بيلحق ولا فكرنا في دورنا إلا هي طلعت في دار جارنا أبو خليل السليم، بداوم في الشفا هان، لا له في شو اسمه ولا إلنا في أي حاجة. التلفزيون
يعني 4-5 ايديها رجليها كنا قاعدين في الصالون ونزل علينا الصاروخ وكان في دخان كتير ما شفناش حاجة.
הראשון וההכרחי ביותר זה הרעות והערבות הזאת שבין המדינה לבין האנשים שלה.
כלומר, ישראל היא כן מדינה שעושה הרבה כדי להחזיר שבויים ונעדרים.
לחלוטין.
ראינו את זה לא רק בסיפור של גלעד שליט בעזה, אלא אפילו עצמותיו של זכריה באומל, אחרי עשרות שנים של היעדרות, הושבו לכאן, נדמה לי בחסותו של נשיא רוסיה שפועלת היום בסוריה. זו לא מדינה ששוכחת את הנעדרים שלה.
אנחנו, בדיוק זה נושא שהוא בדמנו, וכמה שיותר נשמר אותו ונילחם עליו, ככה אנחנו נהיה יותר דבקים האחד בשני, אנחנו נהיה חזקים יותר. ואני חייב להגיד שאני בקשר עם מתאם השבויים והנעדרים, ושאנחנו במטה, אנחנו בקשר עם מתאם שבויים והנעדרים וצוות השון, ואנחנו מכאן רוצים לחזק אותם, ואיזה מצלמה אני יכול לפנות באופן אישי?
אתה יכול לפנות למצלמה מספר 1 באור האדום שם שמולך.
אז מכאן אני רוצה גם לפנות באופן אישי למתאם השבויים ונעדרים, לירון בלום, לרמטכ"ל, לשר הביטחון, לראש הממשלה. אנחנו מנסים לפגוש בכם, בשרי הקבינט ובצוות הזה, כדי להגביר לכם את המוטיבציה, כדי שתבינו שהעם מאחוריכם. תעלו מול המצלמות, תופיעו מול המצלמות, ותגידו בלי למצמץ שהשבת הבנים היא ערך שחייב להשיג אותו במהלך הלחימה הנוכחית, ולא בעוד 7 שנים. כי ההזדמנות הזו עכשיו היא הזדמנות חד פעמית, וצריך להבין, היא לא תחזור.
בוא נדבר על הסיפור הזה של הזדמנות שלא תחזור. שמעתי את לאה גולדין מביעה אמש חשש אצל עמיתנו מחדשות 12, שאם זה לא יקרה עכשיו, החזרת הבנים, זה כבר לא יקרה. למה? מאין נובעת התחושה הזו של now or never?
מכיוון ש7 שנים היו המון הזדמנויות, ואנחנו ראינו, אם אנחנו נלך עכשיו אחורה לצוק איתן, כשאנחנו נפגשים עם שרי קבינט, עם שר ביטחון לשעבר וכו', ואנחנו שואלים אותם, נגמרה לחימה בצוק איתן, ביקשנו הפסקת אש, למה לא דרשתם בהשבת הבנים במהלך ההסכם הזה, בתוך ההסכם שיש סעיף של השבת הבנים? אז אמרו לנו, חמאס, לא הסכימו. אז אנחנו פשוט המשכנו.
אלונה, הציפייה הזו להחזרת שבויים במסגרת הסכם הפסקת האש, שכולנו בלב שותפים לה, היא ריאלית? היא יכולה לקרות?
היא תלויה הרבה בנו. כלומר, אני לא בטוח שזה משהו שאפשר לשלוף אותו בדקה ה-90. ישראל הייתה צריכה, אולי היא עושה זאת, לפעול בעניין לאורך מתחילת המערכה עד לצאתה, ויכלה גם להציב את התנאי הזה כתנאי ראשון ובלעדי.
אנחנו שומעים שהתנאים בינתיים הם הפסקה של חפירת המנהרות, נכון. עצירת ההפגנות בסמוך לגדר הגבול, תמורת הפסקה של ההתקפות על התשתית.
אני אומר שזה עניין שקשה לשלוף אותו בדקה האחרונה כיצירת תנאי, זה היה צריך לעשות עוד מלכתחילה לאורך כל הזמן. חמאס אגב מחכה שישראל תבוא עם הדרישה לשחרור השבויים והנעדרים, כיוון שמה שיעלה מטעם החמאס זה כמובן שחרור אסירים פלסטינים מתוך ישראל, זה באופן אוטומטי חזרה לשיח של עסקה מהסוג הזה. מבחינת החמאס לא יהיה, אני יכול להעריך זאת בסבירות די גבוהה, שחרור של השבויים והנעדרים ללא תמורה של שחרור אסירים מתוך בתי הכלא.
בוא נשאל את עידית שפרן, מבחינת דיני הלחימה, דרישה כזו להחזרת שבויים, לחילופי נפגעים כאלה או אחרים, היא לגיטימית כשבאים לסגור הסכם להפסקת אש.
דרישה ומשא ומתן, זה לא צריך דיני הלחימה בשביל להבין שזה משהו שהוא לגיטימי, ובאמת הלב יוצא ולא כמס שפתיים, ואי אפשר שלא להזדהות עם הדברים שנאמרו פה. אני לא בטוחה שפגיעה בבלתי מעורבים, חפים מפשע, בדברים שדיברנו פה בתחילת השידור, הם עולים בקנה אחד עם מחויבויות לעקרונות הומניטריים בסיסיים.
על זה בלי קשר, האם ניתן למנף את הסיטואציה המדינית שאנחנו נמצאים בה, כשנשיא ארצות הברית לוחץ ואצה לו הדרך להגיע לרגיעה, כשישראל והפלסטינים כנראה רוצים את זה כדי לתת עוד פוש בסיפור של החזרת הבנים?
זה לא עניין מדיני, זה לא עניין לדיני הלחימה, זה עניין חברתי פנים ישראלי. מדינת ישראל ואזרחי ישראל מוכנים לשלם מחיר, למדנו את זה ואנחנו יודעים את זה שוב ושוב, מוכנים לשלם מחיר שבעיני העולם לפעמים הוא נתפס כפנטסטי, על מנת להשיב את הילדים שלה, להשיב את הבנים, לא הילדים, סליחה, להשיב בין שהם בחיים ובין שאינם בחיים. האם בעבור זה מי שצריך לשלם את המחיר, הם אזרחים שהם בלתי מעורבים, זה לב העניין.
תראה, הסוגיה הזאת פשוט מעבירה אותנו לשדה הפוליטי. לראש הממשלה יש בעיה, אין לו תמונת ניצחון. זאת אומרת, גם אם קטשנו את חמאס והרסנו את חמאס, והם באופן יחסי, נניח, אין לו לו משהו מבחינת, לחמאס יש הרבה הישגים סמליים, לנתניהו אין הישגים סמליים.
לכן אומר מור, החזרת הבנים היא תמונת ניצחון.
אני מסכים איתו, השאלה היא איזה עוד תמונות ניצחון אנחנו זה, והאם המבצע הזה יימשך עד שתהיה תמונת ניצחון.
אז עם השאלות האלה...
צריכים להיות הישגים צבאיים, לא תמונות ניצחון. אנחנו לא חנות צילום. צריך להיות פה במפורש הישגים שנמדדים. המדד היחידי שלהם זה יצירת ההרתעה מול חמאס.
זה גם טעות לדבר על זה כתמונה.
אלון, הרגע ראינו פה על המסך את ההישג שהביאה כל המתקפות האחרונות. יש פה את אותו ירי שקורה על יישובי הדרום. שום דבר לא משתנה. שום דבר לא משתנה, ולכן זה סבב, גם אם זה בעוד גזרות. אנחנו רוצים לשנות את המשוואה הזאת, וזה לא יקרה אם אנחנו לא נעמוד על שלנו ולא נדרוש עכשיו שיחזירו לנו את החיילים, אורון שאול והדר גולדין, ואברה מנגיסטו והישאם שעבאן הסייד.
חשוב לנסות. מור חייק, תודה רבה על הדברים האלה. אנחנו יוצאים להפסקת פרסומות קצרה ומיד חוזרים עם כל העדכונים גם על תחי הרקטות האחרונים